Hey, Bobby, great to have you on the show. Super excited, honored to have you on the Living Undeterred podcast.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, you and I have talked a number of times, and I had to hit record because we were having such a deep conversation. I'm like, hey, this is good stuff. Let's save it. That's the beauty of what we do. You have a podcast. I know that it's probably, one of the more rewarding things you do every day, just to meet people. And then in 1 hour, you just feel like you know them really well. There's
That's right.
something beautiful about that.
Yeah, the connections that you make. It's funny. So many people have reached out to me this week, Jeff. I don't know why, but they're like, "Hey, why did you start your podcast? And how do you enjoy it?" And I'm like, the unexpected thing I think are the connections that you make, and the learning. Like
Right.
you can't help but learn about all these different things. So I love that aspect of it.
That's constant learning. And I tell you, if people ask me all the time, it's like, hey, Jeff, what's your secret? And I thought, first of all, I'm a dad from Iowa. There's nothing, believe me, there's nothing special about me. And I don't say that asking for someone to give me like sympathy or empathy. It's like, no, I found ways, through work and trial and error that work for me. And I
Agree.
think anybody, and I want you to share your story because it involves living undeterred. I reread your bio again on LinkedIn. I'm like, wow, I forgot about that. Because you and I haven't talked for a long time. But,
Yeah.
it just goes to show that when you look at somebody, you see color, you see gender, maybe you see economic status, but what you don't see is their story.
That's right. Story is a lot harder to see. It takes time and it takes the listening to hear it.
So how long have you been doing your podcast?
I've been doing my podcast I started it in July of 2020. So, wow, coming up on 3 years. I was going to say 2 years, coming up on three.
You and I are almost I'm just coming up on 3 as well. And yours is, correct me if I'm wrong, unyielding, thriving no matter what.
Yep, unyielded, thriving no matter what.
Yeah. What are some of the recent stories you've had? What are some of the key stories that you can remember here recently that you've had on?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. One went live today, and it's one of my favorite ones. It's he is a psychotherapist as well as a life coach and a yoga instructor, and his name's Tom Glazer. And his story is he had his dream job, loved it. A new coworker came in that had more position power than he did,
Mm-hmm.
and literally hated the ground that he walked on. And Tom wanted to retire from this job. Like he loved this job, loved getting up every single morning and going to work. And at a point, he tried everything he could, and at a point, he's like, "It's not going to work." So he left, went into private practice. But at first, after that, he was really devastated because he's like, "Damn, this was something I really loved." And he started noticing all these happy people around him. And so he got curious and he started saying, "Okay, so why are you happy?" And then that turned into a book project for him. And he's like, what and he just kind of started following that passion of his.
Hmm.
And so that was one of the things I loved. And so we had this great conversation about what makes people happy, and it's not what I don't think it's what people think. People think happiness comes from external circumstances,
Right.
and it seldom does.
Or it's a
There's a stat, right? Researchers have studied it. Your external circumstances account for what, 10% of your happiness. 10%.
I believe it. Um, yeah, there's no question that. And plus two, it's not a destination.
It's not.
It's not like, hey, let's go travel to happiness today. It's like, it's a process. And I don't think you ever, it's a fleeting emotive state. That's what I'd like to say. Whereas
It is.
peace is that place I think we can reach. I think
Yep.
happiness is the pursuit of peace. Peace is a
Hmm.
place I really do think. I think you can reach peace in your life where you just get up. You're genuinely happy for people when they do well.
Hmm.
I know I battled this for a long time, and as an ex-athlete and a competitor, is imposter syndrome. I would
Mm.
see Bobbi Kahler with a podcast, and I'd go, man, her camera's better than mine. Her guest is better than mine. I used to be that guy just not too
Yeah.
long ago. I mean, honestly, I'd say 3-4 years ago.
Yeah.
And in a way that kind of forced me to get better. That's the
Mm.
positive That's the
That's right.
positive nature of jealousy and envy, is it can be an impetus to improving your life. So, but now I'm like, my time like on Twitter now, I'm considering actually just getting off Twitter completely. It just ends up being, for me, difficult to be on Twitter and get much benefit from. Uh,
Really.
LinkedIn, I love. Facebook's okay, but maybe it's just the people I follow on Twitter or the people that get put to me through the algorithm or whatever. But I'm just trying to find more time during my day where I'm in inner peace zone, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and think about it. Social media does not necessarily encourage that.
no, it
What you're
doesn't.
talking
It
about,
doesn't.
that inner peace. And I don't, I don't know if you ever find this on your podcast, but it's interesting to me how I'll have guests and the conversation goes a different way. But it's interesting to me how many of my prior, like over the last 6 weeks or so, how much the guests have brought up things like coming from a love based place. Because you're either love
Mm,
based or you're fear
mm-hmm.
based, right? And fear based is that's where anger and jealousy and all those things tend to
Right.
live, right? Because we think, oh, there's not enough. But when you're really coming from that love based place, you talked about it earlier, that compassion for others, the empathy for others. It's so much
Mm-hmm.
easier for us to be in that space. And when we're in that space, it's easier for us to feel at peace. Because if we're feeling fear, it's really hard to feel at peace. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's just so rewarding to do something for somebody and really not expect anything back,
Yeah.
and also do it almost anonymously, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it's tempting to do something nice and then go to social media and plaster it all over the place. And
Yeah,
I get the utility of that. If I donate $5,000 to a charity, if I post that, that may get more people to donate, right?
that's right.
But you can also see through some of the comments and posts people make that are more just based on narcissism, or
Right.
self validation. That they need affirmation from people. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, we all kind of gravitate, we all kind of go back and forth between it. I've got this thing in my head. It's like, I try to think of Bobbi when I make a post, am I, am I giving gratitude forward? Am I being viral with my gratitude?
Mm,
So if you tell me something nice or you give me an award and I go and post it, I want to make sure that I'm tagging or including other people that I can like brag about them.
yeah.
So it's not like I'm putting you on there so you read my post. I want to tag you and then I'm going to say, "Hey, check out Bobbi. She's got an awesome podcast. I was a guest on her show." So I kind of like, I'm being very intentional in my posts that I want to make that the effect of being viral on social media. Um, do that with gratitude. If one person tells me something good, I want to put out 5 good
Mm,
gratitudes out in the world
right.
at that moment. Imagine if we
Right.
all replicated that,
We could
you
we could
know?
change a lot, right? Because so we don't see that much
Yeah.
out there. Like this is just going through my head. I was on LinkedIn earlier this morning, and it was one of my colleagues had liked someone else's comment or post, and it was this post. I think it was taken from a barber shop, and it was like the camera was up in the corner, like that they just have shining down, and it was a barber who was shaving the head of a young
Mm,
girl. She's a
right.
cancer patient. Have you seen this one? I don't know if you've seen it or not, but so he's shaving this
I
girl's head because
probably
she's a
haven't,
cancer
but
patient.
I'm sure no, I haven't.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So and she's crying because obviously she has long beautiful hair, and at the end he hugs her, and you can just see in the hug like you can see the humanity in the hug. But the next thing he does
Right.
is he takes the same set of shears that he used for her, and he shaved his
Mm,
own head right there in the moment, and it was just beautiful.
that's
Like
awesome.
it's hard to watch that and just not feel stirred, in your
Right.
heart.
And that's the good of social media,
That is the good of it.
you know?
Yeah. Hmm.
It's one of the reasons why I think LinkedIn's probably my favorite, just because I see more of that type of stuff than I do on the other uh,
Yeah.
platforms.
Yeah.
So let's hear about your story. Let's hear about your story. So one thing I always ask people who are kind of in the space you're in is a coach, like a life coach or a motivational coach, whatever. How is that? How do you explain that to somebody that doesn't know what that is? And how is that different than, say, a therapist or somebody
Okay.
like that?
All right. So a therapist. Let's start with that part of it. Because I
Hmm.
have uh, I saw a therapist for many years. My backstory there is a little bit. I had a wonderful parents. My mom was one of the most amazing people I've ever known, and she had deep psychological issues. They believed it was at the time they called it functioning
Mm.
schizophrenia. So there were some days that were amazing.
Oh,
There were
wow.
some days that it was extremely violent in our household. And so I had a therapist to help me deal with those types of things. That you definitely want a therapist for that. Anything with mental, like if it's mental illness or it's like in my case, it was overcoming a trauma. My belief is that that's when you want a therapist or a psychotherapist, psychologist, something like that. Coaches
Mm.
should not delve into that. We should not be doing that.
Right.
So what I do, I call myself a self leadership coach because self leadership is all about how do we direct our lives and our actions towards a desired goal. And I kind of think that self leadership, it's kind of
Hmm.
like your owner's manual for yourself. But we're not given one of those when we
Hmm.
enter this
I
world.
like that.
So it's
Right.
how do we get the best out of
Right.
ourselves? And the reason I'm laughing there is several years ago I bought it's a used BMW. It's awesome. It's red. It's real cool. And the guy I bought it from is a master BMW mechanic. And he said, Bobby, you really want to read the owner's manual because this car can do so much stuff that you can't even imagine right now. And I kind of feel like that's how most of us are. We
Right.
have this great untapped potential. So that's kind of what I do. I kind of help people think about what's the direction I want to go and how do I align
Hmm.
my resources, the way I think, the way I act, the way I behave, the skills I build. How do I direct all that so that I can achieve my goals? So does that kind of answer your question?
Hmm. It does. And so when it comes to goal setting, what's the best way to go about that? I mean, it seems like sometimes people set goals that are unrealistic. They can set goals that are too easy.
Mhm.
How do you suggest somebody starting out in their goal setting?
So with goal setting, I I kind of have a different view than some people. I think that there's absolutely a time and place for goals. I happen to think, though, it's way more important to set a direction where, like, this is the direction I want to go. Um, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, the science backs that up. There's an amazing researcher. His name's Richard Boyatzis. He was my professor at grad school. And back in
Hmm.
1969, he started studying how do people change in intentional and desirable ways, in sustainable ways. And he came up with what's
Okay.
now called the intentional change theory, ICT for short. And it begins with our vision of our ideal self. So, for example, part of my ideal self is that I'm a fit, healthy, strong athlete. It's part of my ideal self that guides my everyday, right? So that means I align the way I eat.
Right.
It means I work out. Means all those things, right? It's all aligned with that. Versus saying I'm going to
Right.
lose 10 pounds by July 2nd,
Right.
right, or whatever it might be. So I like to say pick a
Nope.
direction.
Yep.
Because I just think it's a lot more positive. And you'd asked about my story earlier, and the other reason I believe in this direction is, part of my story is back on March 6th of 2003. I collapsed. And by that I mean I couldn't even raise my forearm to brush my teeth. And it was overwork, it was too much stress, but it started a 10-year journey. It took me 10 years to get fully back to being healthy. And not just healthy,
Hmm.
but being strong
And
and an
this happened
athlete again.
literally overnight.
No, Jeff, I was I
This happened
was
literally overnight.
no, it was I ignored a lot of the signs. Really, it happened over the course of about 10 months, where gradually I kept getting more and more tired.
Okay.
It became hard to take a shower. I couldn't stand up long enough to take a shower. but I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing because that's what I've always
Hmm.
known. Like that's my signature strength. And so eventually it caught up with me on March 6th.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, this was about, I don't know, 5, 6 months into this, a doctor said, he's like, based on the research and what he thought I had, he said, people with this, only about 3% of them experience a full recovery. And my first question back was, okay, but when can I go for a run again? Because I was a runner. And he's like, Bobbi, he goes, I think, and he's like, I
Right.
think you're going to have to accept your days of being an athlete are over. And I thought, no, I've always been an athlete. I will always be an athlete. I
Right.
don't know what that's going to look like, but I will always be an athlete. And and at that point,
Right.
Jeff, that direction, I will be an athlete again. That, I didn't set a specific goal like I'm going to get better and run a marathon, right? It was just, I am an athlete. And now I do
I
stuff that
love
I
that.
couldn't even imagine doing before I got sick.
The reason why I absolutely love this way you've explained it is think of anxiety, and let's just go to Gen Z because that's an area where a lot of my initiatives are being focused on. But
Yep.
think of the anxiety with Gen Z. Okay, let's think of
Mm-hmm.
some goals that an average 16-year-old
Oh,
has. I want to graduate with a 4.0. I want to go to
mm-hmm.
Stanford. I want to play Division I sports. I want. And they have these goals, yet no direction. So they get up in the morning, they're not doing things that day to get them in that position where when that opportunity presents itself, they can do the best that they can. And then if they don't achieve that goal, let's say they get a chance to start on a basketball game. This is the shot they've been trying, and they get in and they have 2 turnovers and they come
Yeah.
out. That's not the end of the goal. It's like that's part of the process. That's part of why when you do finally get to where you think you want to go, why you can look in the mirror and say, you know what? I'm happy I didn't give up when that was on the table. That was an option for me at that point in my life was to quit, and I didn't. There's
Yeah.
something about taking the pressure off,
Mm-hmm.
having a specific goal. Because what happens with a lot of type A people, Bobbi, a lot of competitive people, they want to have a goal, right? When they get it. And then what do? What's my next goal? It's like, so, I think you got to think of these things as a process or a direction, as you said. I really, really like the way that was presented. And I think for kids, focusing on, are you doing the things today to get you in a position that when that goal presents itself, you can capitalize?
That's right. And related to this is something, it's research. The researcher's name is Gary Latham, and he researches something called learning goals versus performance goals. Because if you have a
Hmm.
performance goals, and this holds if it's in athletics or let's say sales, whatever it might be, the performance goal is the number, right? And that's all you can see. A
Mm-hmm.
learning goal, however, is about how do I get to that number. So you're setting your goals differently,
Right.
and by doing that, the people, and I don't remember the
Right.
exact specifics anymore, but learning goals, people who set learning goals, they outperform people who set performance goals by something like 80%. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's a substantial
Hmm.
number. Because think about it, to use your example there, let's say, you're a kid and you finally get to go into the game, you have 2 turnovers, whatever, and then you come out, if it's just a performance goal, that's a yes, no. Did I hit it? Did I not? Right? But if it's a learning goal, then you can also think about,
Right.
okay, but what did I learn? And the learning is so valuable.
Yeah. It's got me thinking about, let's take something that I'm passionate about because, and I don't know your experience in this area, feel free to add, but let's take alcohol, for example. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say I was an alcoholic for 30 something years, and I want to quit. So that's my goal, right, Bobbi?
Yep.
I don't want to drink alcohol. I want to be sober. That's my goal. And then I'm doing really good. That's my every day. I'm focusing on going to meetings and all that. And then one day I decide I want to get drunk. I just can't handle it. It's too stressful. And so I
Mm-hmm.
have that one day in 6 months where I drink. And what happens is, because I had this goal that's fairly unrealistic for the first time around. I mean, most people fall off the wagon a number of times before they get sober. So I set this kind of a ridiculous goal that I'm never going to drink alcohol again. And I did. So I kind of I made, a human mistake error in that
That's
day,
right.
but I torture myself. I go on social media, I cry, I apologize, I beat myself up, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but you know what? One drink in 6 months, that's a hell of a success story. That's
That's a
that's
victory.
that's direction. You're heading in the right direction. But we
That's right.
don't do that in the alcohol space. We just don't.
Mm-mm.
We call it a failure. Now, the people that are in rehab, they'll say, "Oh yeah, recovery is it's part of the process, falling off the wagon, whatever." But I just think that I have a lot of friends that are just adamant about this, keeping track, keeping score of how many days they've been sober. And I'm like, I never went down that hole, because my fear was, if I did choose one day to drink, I wasn't going to beat myself up. I
Yeah.
just wasn't. I haven't had a
Yep.
drink in 5 years. If I drank tonight, I would say, you know what, Jeff, 99.9999% of the last 5 years, I didn't drink. That's a hell of a success story.
That's a huge success story.
Instead of beating
It's really
myself up.
fun. Yeah, it's really funny you
Right.
bring up that example, because when he was a PhD candidate at Yale, Richard Boyatzis, he started studying why do some, people, he started with alcoholics. Why do some people successfully give up alcohol and others don't?
Mm-hmm.
And part of what he found is that if they tie it to their ideal self. So, for example, if you were to say, I'm going to use a different example. I was talking to a woman on a plane once. She was in her 70s and she was really fit. And I said, wow. And we got in this conversation, and I said, wow, you're in amazing shape. And she's like, I used to be overweight. And she goes, I tried every diet. They all failed. And she goes, until one day I said, you know what? I want to
Right.
be the type of grandmother that can go, skiing and hiking and biking with my grandkids. That's different,
Right.
right? Because now it's about how do I become that
100%.
person? Yeah. It's not about a goal of losing
Right.
weight or a goal of not drinking. It's about who am I and how do I become more of that person?
Yeah, I think we need to give ourselves permission to have more wins, more success
Yeah.
stories, more. I think, I had a podcast yesterday, and I'm going to probably just completely hack this up. Maybe you know the answer. It's like, you know, 80% of our thoughts in a course of a day have a tinge of negativity to them,
Oh,
or self doubt, or, and thoughts are an interesting part of where I'm really uh, focused on being really attentive and aware of my thoughts, because I don't think I'm abnormal in the context that I have negative thoughts as well, like everybody else. Um, I try to focus really hard on letting them die. In other words, don't identify with them, just letting them drift off like a wave. Um, but the fact that we know going into this that majority of our thoughts we have, all of us, are
mhm.
negative, we need to find ways to fight against that, because you can't just stop thinking. That's not
No,
going to happen. You
no.
can't just say, I'm only going to have good thoughts. It's like if I say, don't think of a blue car. Okay,
You're going to
don't
think
think
of
of
a
a
blue
blue car. All you can do is think of a blue car. It's like, so if you just
car.
sit around thinking to yourself, I'm not going to have negative thought, I'm not going to have negative thought. Oh, damn, this sucks. It's like you're going to have a negative thought. It's like, I think we
Yep.
just got to really look at this differently, and maybe pull from some ancient philosophy, stoicism, things like that, where they talked about reframing. People who do follow me know that I'm pretty heavy in Stoic. I
Yeah.
wouldn't say I'm not a philosopher. I like
Mhm.
the ideology of reframing, and the Stoics seem to do a lot of that. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, anything we can do, because right now we're the
Mhm.
most depressed, anxious, over medicated, over analyzed, over diagnosed humans ever existed, and it
That's
doesn't
right.
have to be this way, right?
No. Now, I am so glad you brought this up because you're right. The average person, the vast majority of our thoughts tend to go to the negative, tend to go to the bad. So there is a program that I went through, I don't know, a year and a half ago. Actually, I started by reading the book. It's called Positive Intelligence, and it's by a researcher at Stanford, Shirzad Shamin. And he has taken basically a blend of four different sciences, plus there's a lot of meditation, the ancient wisdom pulled into it. But the four sciences are neuroscience, cognitive behavioral therapy, performance science, and positive psychology. Now, my grad degree is based in positive psychology, and positive psychology is the study of human flourishing.
Hmm.
So it's not positive thinking, right? It's not like,
Yep.
oh yeah, it's just being a Pollyanna. So so positive intelligence is, it's really about our mental fitness, not mental health, but mental fitness. And our mental fitness is all about our
Right.
capacity to respond to life's challenges with a positive mindset. And there are two assessments a person can take, and you can find
Mm-hmm.
both of them on my website if they're free. They each take around 3 to 5 minutes. The first one will tell you your PQ score. So how much of your time is your mind working for you versus working against you? And most people who have taken that have
Right.
been really surprised, like under 50% of the time. The second assessment will
Okay.
tell you which of the scientists call them our inner saboteurs, and there are 10 different saboteurs that they've identified. And basically, a saboteur is just simply our automatic ways of thinking and reacting. So the other assessment will tell you which of those you have. But all of us, the one that's universal is a judge. And that's the judge that judges ourselves, judges others, and judges circumstances.
Hmm.
And what the researchers have found is like the vast majority of our stress comes from these inner saboteurs, which is essentially our inner talk. And it's stunning to me. So, what's fabulous about it, though, they've also laid out the how to counteract it. And it's things like our self command muscle, to notice when we're having those negative thoughts, and to stop and redirect. Because once you start, I went through the program myself, and I
Mm-hmm.
became a coach in it because I love it. But I was surprised because I thought I have pretty good awareness, right? I've been to grad school, I've been working on this for how many decades.
Right.
I was surprised how many times, especially, you kind of get hijacked, and then you can spend time in those negative thoughts. Like, I had one client, Jeff, and he's an amazing person. And he was like, Bobby, he goes, when something bad would happen, he goes, I might stay ruminating on that for days. Think about what that does to you.
Mm.
I mean, days we're giving over to this. And then he went through the
And
program
everybody
with me,
around you.
and everyone around you. And I mean, that's what his wife said too. They went through the program with me. They're two of my clients. And he's like, after like a week or two, he's like, oh my God. He goes, think about the time I have back now and the energy. So there are things that people can do, but it
Yeah.
starts with, highly recommend that book and take those two assessments. They're free. It gives you so much insight. And because it doesn't have to be this way.
Now, these assessments, these assessments you have on your site, are these proprietary you designed, or these ones that you've kind of got from other people that design these assessments?
Oh, the good question. The assessments, they're on. You can access them through my site. They're the same ones that you can get through
Okay.
positiveintelligence.com. And it's just because I went through their coaching program that
Okay.
I just link them there for convenience, because a lot of people come to my
Okay.
site for those types of things. So yeah, I'm not smart enough to build those, Jeff.
You talk
I
about
leave that to the smart people.
I'm not either. I just steal things. I just steal all my ideas from other smart people. But the positive psychology movement's pretty big.
It's
Do you know
huge.
Scott Barry Kaufman? He's the host. Yeah, you know of him then, right?
I think I
Scott
recognize
Barry
the name. Who
Kaufman.
posted what?
He's the host of the Psychology podcast,
Ooh.
and he's got a new book out called Choose. He's got a new book out called Choose Growth, and I'm
Mm.
getting a signed copy from him. I reached out to him, and he replied. I told him I'd make a nice donation to a charity of his choice if he were to sign it and send it to me. So I'm waiting in my mailbox to get his book. But Scott's podcast is great. Again, it's
Mm.
called the Psychology Podcast, but he spends time interviewing people that are in that realm of positive psychology. And in my book that I wrote in 2019, it published in 2020, I was doing research on post traumatic stress, and that's how
Oh
that's
yeah,
impacted, not just veterans, but you can be in a car accident and have PTSD. And I stumbled across this idea, this term called post traumatic growth
that's right.
by, I'm going to mess this up. I think it's Robert Tedeschi or something, like in the 70s or 80s. There was a movement for this, and it just, for some reason, it just died out. But I'm like, post traumatic growth. And I thought to myself, yeah, why do we just, for example, um, what did someone tell me about post traumatic stress disorder? There was another acronym for it, like post traumatic opportunities or something. I can't remember what the term was, but it's again, it's taking an event itself and changing the impact that event has on our life. And it's similar to what I'm trying to do when I do my public speaking. My talk's called Living Undeterred, Better Not Bitter. And my goal is to tell people, sure, my son was poisoned by fentanyl. It stinks. It sucks. I miss
Hmm.
him immensely. My wife, again, followed that up with alcohol abuse, caught up to her. And at 46, she died. Yet I'm a better man. And I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. However, I have bad moments and
Of
I have them
course.
daily. I mean, every day. And it feels like I got punched in the stomach. And sometimes it happens in the middle of a podcast. And
Hmm.
I don't want to say I'm triggered. I just think I'm human. When we
Just
put this
human.
trigger label on people, I think that's an insult. We're just human. We're not
Yeah.
triggered. Some people we're all human. I don't know. I just think there's a lot to this positive psychology, and I'm really, really interested in finding more guests like you I can bring on that can take an event like death, or an event like a health diagnosis, or an event like bankruptcy or divorce, and
Hmm.
not let it define you for the rest of your life negatively. It can define you, but just make it define you positively, right?
Right. Right. It can be. You can reframe it. And I'm reading a book right now, and I don't know who the author is. Shame on me. But it's called Post Traumatic Growth, and it's very fascinating, and it goes into the science behind it. And you were saying the thing about, like, one of my guests, her name is Jenny. uh she was the victim of a home invasion. Her neighbor broke into her house. Jenny was
Mm,
shot multiple times, and one of the things that Jenny said is, he only
wow.
wins if he changes who I am, or if I don't grow and become better because of it. I
Yep.
thought, wow,
Yep.
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Do you know who Jennifer? Do you know who Jennifer Tracy is?
I don't know if I do. Who is she?
You should reach out to her on LinkedIn. She's become a good. Well, her she's got an amazing story. It's Jennifer Tracy, and I guarantee you reach out to her, she'll reply and she'll become a friend.
Okay.
Her husband and her daughter were killed by a drunk driver like
Oh,
18 years ago, and her other daughter was injured in the accident. And through a process, Jennifer forgave the individual who had
hmm.
drove drunk, and he's now out of prison, and she's forgiven him. And there's something about redemption. There's something about forgiveness in this whole story of humanity that we miss. We're full of vengeance and payback and uh, you know um, retribution and stuff. We're just trying to. I don't know. And her story even gets more amazing. She's been through some traumatic brain. I don't know if injury specifically, but some really suicidal ideation. She talks about driving down the road and just considering pulling the wheel into a semi.
Mm,
Yeah, she's an amazing person. But going back to this forgiveness thing, I wanted to
yeah.
kind of have you comment on how important is forgiveness of not just others that have, quote, wronged you, but forgiving yourself for whatever has taken you up to this day.
Forgiveness is huge, and the forgiveness of ourselves, I think that's sometimes the hardest one. And I was just reading or listening to
Mm-hmm.
something by Eckhart Tolle, and he was saying that often we
Oh
don't
yeah.
forgive ourselves because, we go back and we're like, oh, like, when I was 20 or whatever, I did XYZ. But he's like, but
Right.
you're judging yourself through the
Yeah.
lens of your current awareness. If you had your current awareness when you were
Right.
20, you wouldn't have done it, or whenever, whatever age it might have been. So the forgiveness of ourselves is huge.
Right.
And here's the thing about forgiving others that I think a lot of people miss. I know I did for years. You don't forgive them for them. You forgive them to give yourself peace. That's because
Absolutely.
otherwise we're holding on to it, right? We're holding on to the hurt. And here's the thing, I know, like, I've been betrayed, I've been hurt by people, but do you think that they think about it after it's done? No, I'm the only one thinking about it.
Right.
So
Right.
if I hold on to it, I'm hurting
Yeah.
myself.
Actually, most people, I'd probably say 90% of the time that you think someone's thinking about you, maybe 99% of the time that they're not.
They're
They
not.
probably could care less. Yeah, they got their own worry of someone thinking about them. So they're just, that game constantly plays over and over.
That's
I was
right.
listening to a podcast with Sam Harris, the Making Sense podcast with Sam Harris, and he was talking about the remembering self and the experiencing self. So there's like
Mhm.
two selves. You have
Yeah.
your memories, and then you have the experiences. And he says the problem why our memories are so terrible, and it's why, when someone says they witnessed a crime, in the dark, poor lighting, even if it's good lighting, sometimes it's very unclear if whether that witness is accurate in their statement. It's because there's biases involved. There's confirmation bias, there's recency bias. We tend to remember or put most weight on things that happened most recently to us. That's why when investors look at their stock portfolio, when a stock is down, they feel that more than that stock was down 6 months ago, that actually went down more. The recency bias holds them in the current position, and they put that
Yeah.
emotion into that stock loss. We do that with our memories.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of really good information out there. I think if people are open minded to learn about these things, that in our course of our daily actions, when we have an ability to test these things, the more we know, the more that we can give ourselves opportunities to improve our well being. Right.
That's right. That's right. And even if, let's say that your memory is 100% accurate, how often do we want to go back and revisit that pain? Right? We're choosing to relive it.
Mm-hmm.
The pain's, I mean, it's over,
Mm-hmm.
but we go back to it and we go back to it and we go
Right.
back to it, and it creates more suffering for ourselves. And I'm not saying that it's pleasant when someone treats you badly, poorly, right? I just did on my podcast I also have Rise and Thrives, which are like they're under 10 minutes, they're like a mini monologue. And I just did one. It was released this week on this topic, and the name of it, the title was, "Can you forgive the person for how they've wronged you?" Because I had an experience recently, where someone did something pretty poor, pretty, bad, nasty,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and but it led me to have a really great
Yeah.
epiphany. And I'm like, so in other words, that experience, I can thank them for that experience because they helped me grow. And it released all the
Right.
anger or whatever that I was feeling. So it was a growth opportunity. So it's a tricky thing, because the other thing about forgiveness too is I think people always link it with forgive and forget, which means you just got a free pass.
Oh yeah.
Like, go
Yeah.
ahead and treat me badly.
Right.
I'm not saying forgive and forget. If someone treats you badly, I'm not saying go put yourself back in that position to be hurt again. But don't hold on to the hurt, because that only hurts you. It doesn't hurt them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got a saying I like that I just started using: lean into it to learn from it. Lean into
Yeah,
it to learn from it. And
love that.
for me, yeah, I'm going through my day and something happens. Maybe some really good lead I had that was potentially going to be working on our app that we're launching, or maybe somebody that I've been trying to, get some collaboration with, and all of a sudden just something happens. It's like, lean into it to learn from it. And the best example, the absolute best example I can give, and I it's my show, so I guess I could talk about this. If it was your show right now, I'd ask permission if I could go down this road. But
You can do whatever you
is
want.
I had a brush with, I I know it's my show, but I had a brush with suicidal. I had a brush with suicidal ideation the Christmas after my wife died,
Yeah.
and now I talk about it pretty publicly. It was effing terrifying because I had never had what I would consider a strong suicidal ideation thought. I've had thoughts where I just, hell, I don't want to be around. I just stay in bed or something, but ending my, ending my life, that had never crossed my mind to the point where I was playing out the scenarios in my mind. And this was just 2 Christmases ago, Bobbi. This is not like in my 30s or 40s. This is like recent, really recently. And I won't bore you with the specifics because, again, I want to turn this show's about you, not me. But I took shortcuts in my grieving. I got
Oh.
overconfident. I stopped meditating. I stopped working out. I was eating
Mhm.
pizza. I got sloppy into what I was doing that was working. And in an instant, it almost cost me my life. So I leaned into it. So after the event happened, I kind of like deprogrammed and I thought, okay, I need to digest what just happened because it can't happen again.
No.
It can't happen again.
Mm-mm.
I'm not going to allow it. And so I sat down thinking, what did I do the preceding week or two leading up to this moment when I was triggered? And I figured it out. I had exactly done those things. I skipped all the things I was doing that was working so well. It's like sometimes things work so well, we stop doing them.
That's right.
In this case, it almost cost me my life. So I thought, okay, lean into it, learn from it, take that story and add it to your story, with my
Mm-hmm.
grief and suffering and alcoholism and compulsive gambling, all that. And now that's part of what I talk about. And hopefully that can become relatable and it's therapeutic. And I know when I was reading your bio, getting into some of the things you talked about, you even just mentioned somebody that kind of wronged you. There's something about being vulnerable that I think is our way out of this mental health crisis. What do you think about that?
Mm. I think because when you're vulnerable, I think that you're revealing your true self, right? And in that
Mm-hmm.
authenticity invites people in. Plus, it invites it invites people to step up and be there for you, right? I don't know how you are, but like
Right.
maybe because of my childhood, I don't know for sure. Maybe it's just my wiring. I always like to be that self-reliant person. I can handle this, right? And there's
Yeah, me
great
too.
value in that.
Yep.
But also, though, when you're vulnerable and you let people see, like, hey, maybe I am struggling here, um, it allows people to show up for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because feedback I got many times, especially when I was younger, was, um, well, it never occurred to me that you needed help. It just, and
Right.
it's like, well, of course I need help. But if you don't show it, if you're not honest about what's really going on, how can other people be there for you? So I think that's why it's important.
Yeah, it gives people permission to share their story once you do
Hmm.
your story first.
Yep.
So my little trick is when someone asks me pretty much any question, what do you do? Blah, 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 blah. I like to just very briefly, like literally in an instant, tell them real quickly. Son died, wife died, wrote a book, do a podcast. I'm a mental health advocate. It's like once I do that, their jaw like drops. They're like, you know what? Now you say that, they were going to tell me maybe they were a mechanic. And now they're like, well, my wife's an alcoholic too, or my husband's an
Hmm.
alcoholic. And my son, is in rehab. And then they start things they would never tell me. I mean, I've literally hugged people on airplanes in
Yeah.
15 minutes, crying with strangers I've never met. And it all
Hmm.
started because I let my guard down first, with intention. And I'm finding out that that's kind of, I don't know, it works. I can't
It does
explain it.
work.
It just brings people together very quickly. But as long as I don't
I
sit there
think
and make it all about me, me, me,
that's right.
me, 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 people get turned off of that very quickly.
That's right. But by sharing our story, it invites them to share theirs if we're willing to listen. And
Right.
to that point, one of the things
Yeah.
that when I've done workshops or speeches or whatever, I've often shared the story about either the illness or, I had what one speech pathologist called catastrophic speech problems. That's what I was diagnosed with when I was 5 years old. And luckily my mom's like, well, we're not listening to him, which is probably one of the best things that ever happened, because otherwise that would have been my fate. But when I've shared that, it is stunning to me,
Right.
Jeff, how many people in the audience will come up to me afterwards and say, I had a similar experience, or my child had a similar experience, or whatever it might be. We're full of these stories. That's one of the
Right.
reasons I started my podcast, because I thought we all have these amazing stories and they're not being heard. And we all have these stories. And I
Right.
think that when we do that, we can connect at a much deeper level. And that connection, I think, spurs compassion, right? Once you've heard someone's story,
Mm-hmm.
how can you, it's hard not to be compassionate towards them. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. So, in the time we have left, how do we get out of this mess? How do we get out of this mental health crisis that our country's in?
That is a big question, Jeff. And I am not a mental health expert. Right. I think it's some of the things that we've talked about here, though. I think, I do think that positive intelligence, positive psychology, those are two great things to really explore. I also think it goes to being connected with people, not just connected on your phone, because
Mm,
there's a huge difference. Like my father
right.
recently passed away. He passed away in November. And a lot of people, they posted on Facebook, and that was very nice. And I loved that. There were other people though who picked up the phone and they called and
Right.
they said, Bobbi, how can we help you? How can we be there for you?
Right.
That made me feel,
Right.
it doesn't take away the grieving, it doesn't take away the hurt, but I knew I wasn't alone. And I think the connection is key. And ironically,
Right.
even though we live in a society where we have access to all these social media and all these apps and everything, researchers are finding that we've never felt more lonely, isolated, and disconnected than what we do now. So we need to have real connections. That's part of the answer, I think.
It's the irony of all ironies is we're the most connected to everything other than ourselves,
Yep.
and we have more abundance.
Mm-hmm.
I can get information literally, and now with this new AI technology coming out, you won't even have to write papers in college anymore. That you can just tell a topic and they'll write a book on it. I mean, that's kind of
Yeah,
how we're heading, and nothing will be hard work and authentic anymore. Everything we're developing from an AI is a shortcut. Everything is
that's right.
taking out the impact of a hard day's work or I don't know. It seems like this technology is great. It's we can do some really cool things with audio, visual, and presentations, but is it really helping? Especially again going back to the kids, are we really helping the kids become self sufficient? And there's more millennials and more Gen Zs, older Gen Z, living at home than in history. So
Mm-hmm.
how are we going to compete with other countries, with China and these other countries that we're competing against with not just monetary things, but with with human capital, with labor, with are we giving our kids the best opportunity to compete with the world? I don't know if we're doing them to compete with Chick-fil-A in their local community. I mean, it's a sad state of affairs.
Well, it is in like the example of the paper, right? With AI, that it can write it for you. But that's not the reason you write the paper. Yeah, you write the paper because you want to learn, but there's also the other part of education. How we develop and how we grow is through those little struggles. Like when you're struggling to write the paper, you learn
Right.
something about yourself. And not only do you learn something about yourself, that's where
Absolutely.
true self-esteem,
Yep.
self-esteem, self-efficacy, self-confidence, that's where it comes from. And we're taking that away. And it is a disservice in my humble opinion, which, what that's worth, Jeff.
Yeah.
Maybe a
Well,
quarter.
it's our job it's our job try to design and implement and advocate and make the
Mm-hmm.
initiatives. We have an obligation for the generations behind us, that
Mm-hmm.
not just so they can inherit a better place than I had when I was born, but have an opportunity to do the best that they can with what they have. And I just don't know if we're doing the best that we can be. We're doing a good job. I don't want to make it sound like I'm being negative with parents and teachers and all that, but it's like we're doing good, but we can always do better. There's always room on almost
Yeah,
any level to get yourself better, whether it's your
that's
health,
right.
your exercise, your attitude, your finances, the money thing's a really big part of some of the initiatives we're doing for Gen Z to get them in a position where they have a healthy relationship with money,
Mm-hmm.
because money seems to be the problems for a lot of divorce. It's the problem with a lot of people handling credit and debt, and it creates anxiety, which then impacts your mental health. But
Mm-hmm.
well, do you have any last things you want to tie up with? I know we went down a lot of really interesting roads, but and then also I wanted to find out how people can reach you. What's the easiest way for people if they want to get you as a guest on their podcast? I mean, how do people contact you, Bobbi?
Okay. So as far as the contact, two ways. Either through my website, which is just bobbykahler.com. Do you want me to spell that, Jeff, or will you put it in the show notes?
Kahler, but I'll have it in the show notes as well.
Perfect.
And it's
Perfect.
Bobbi.
That's right. That's right. And then I'm very active on LinkedIn. And I post 3 to 4 times a week. So those are two great ways to get in touch with me. And as far as your question, any final thoughts? One of the things that my life has taught me, whether it's the illness or whatever, is that there's always a way forward. Always. I don't care how bleak it
Yeah.
looks. There's always a way forward, and just to really believe that, because if we don't believe it, we won't look for it, and if we don't look for it, we won't find it. So just know that. I mean, I've had my share of
Mm.
dead ends, brick walls, big surprises, but there's always a way forward.
Yeah, that's a great way to end the podcast that's called Living Undeterred, because
Hmm.
there's always a way forward
Yeah.
is exactly what Living Undeterred is all about. So that's a great way to end the show. But thank you, Bobbi, and very much enjoyed talking with you again. I know our paths will cross again. We have too many common interests and passions, but thank you very much for being on the show. Very much enjoyed it.
Thank you. I had a great time.